and adding shadows to what we draw. So I've created this little setup right here, and you can see we have like a different textures here, and also there is a adjustment layer. All of this is in group, and the group is locked, and basically this file itself will be called a paper canvas. Basically what I wanted to create is a very quick canvas that kind of looks like a paper, and if you start drawing underneath that layers here, you can see how different it looks. It's actually adding this little bit of that paper feel to it, especially with this brush that we have here, this one that we've been using before. It kind of feels more traditional. It doesn't feel so digital. If you would just delete that layer or hide this group and use your regular brush, you can see it's very digital compared to what this looks like. Even just those layers are adding this effect. The main reason to use that effect is just basically for a style. So I'm gonna delete that layer that we've drawn on and create a new one. Select that brush right here. It's gonna be more than 3 pixels. Let's use 4 pixels or maybe 5 pixels just for drawing. Maybe zoom out, and you can see that now we can draw. So we have our setup. We can do our lines. I'm going to press Control A to select the whole canvas, and if I just move to the corner, you can see there is a marquee that goes around full canvas. Control A is just basically select everything, and then I'm gonna have that select, and I always can press delete, and if I'm not happy with whatever I have here, I don't have to go Control Z a couple of times or go to history. I can just Control A and then delete. That will allow me to delete everything that we had in this layer. So what I want to do is I want to do a very quick sketch, maybe one of those castles that we've seen so far, and I'm not gonna be focusing too much on like making sure that it's very nice or anything like that. I just want to draw something really quick. I just change my brush size and basically draw like a really quick sketch of a castle, really quick sketch of that, you know, of that tower sort of thing. So just kind of drawing, and obviously it's not anything super accurate, but basically I just want to draw a couple of lines like this. Okay. So what I'm trying to do here is, what I'll try to do is, I might actually zoom in just to kind of get those lines. What allows me to do, like if I zoom in, I can draw more from the elbow, and because usually when you draw a long line versus a short line has more accuracy than the long line. There's more room for error to create less accurate long line, whereas in short it can be a little more accurate. So what I'm going to do is, actually I don't like this, I'm gonna start from scratch. So I'm gonna draw like a line like this, and then another line like that, and I want to just draw a couple of lines. I want to create that tower that has those kind of ribbing going on, and I'll explain exactly in a second why we're drawing this. So right now I'm just drawing the outline. Maybe the tower itself can sit on some kind of cliff. So I'll just draw the outline of a cliff. It's not going to be too tall of a tower, but you know, it's a kind of rocky kind of looking cliff, and that's pretty much it. So I'm just gonna draw a couple of more lines right here. Again, doesn't need to be 100% accurate. It's just a very quick sketch. I like to repeat my lines just in case, and if I don't like this one, I'll make a selection, you know, and delete. Press M to unselect, and then there we go. I might actually use eraser. I don't want to delete everything, but just want to delete that line right there. There we go. Okay, so we have more or less the lines that represent this tower outlines. And what we want to do next is we want to sort of fake our shadows in. And there's few ways that you can do it. Obviously, you can just do it exactly the same way as we did it before, where you would just, you know, create this very deep shadow. But maybe aesthetically, this is not what you're after, right? Maybe this kind of effect that you see right here is not exactly what you're looking for. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm just gonna Control Z a couple of times. And because I like the overall sketch here, I'm just gonna create a new layer. And there's a couple of ways you can deal with that. So what I'm going to do is crosshatch, and I'll show you exactly what that means. So basically, if I want to imagine that there is a shadow, I'll kind of draw the outline of it. So maybe the outline of this shadow would be right here, going all the way up to here. This is too large of a brush, again, too large. Oh, this is the correct size. And I'm kind of drawing the outline of it. And then I'm imagining that there's a crosshatch going on, and there's a couple of ways that you can crosshatch. So one way is you can go with the directionality of the object itself, and you have to pay attention to not crosshatch outside of those lines too much, because it's just gonna look dirty. So I'm gonna go back right here, zoom in, and maybe start crosshatching like this. And it's kind of like time consuming, but the effect is going to be kind of interesting. So that's why I'm doing this. And that's what you would normally do when you actually draw. When you draw with pencils, you would actually have to do this kind of cross-hatching if you would want to cross-hatch at all. So then I'll make maybe cross-hatch like this, just to show that there is a shadow right here. And then I'll just flip, because it's much easier for my hand to kind of crosshatch in this direction. It's actually not specifically crosshatching, because crosshatching itself would mean that you're actually creating lines that are intersecting like this. This is just basically shadowing with lines. Again, kind of time consuming, but that's fine. Kind of trying to get the essence of what this really is. Cool. So I have this kind of interesting looking shadow right here, and I'll go back and do a little more. So maybe this part here is gonna catch some shadow too. So it's just a lot of those small lines. And I might just draw, just kind of this outline right here. Cool. So now we can clearly see that where the shadows are, and actually this should be in shadows too. So I'll undo and start drawing those lines here too. And I'm kind of changing the direction slightly as I draw, just imagining where the horizon line is, or more or less. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this sketch right here, and I'm just going to delete some of those lines that we had here. Because I only want to have this shadow effect, but I don't want to have it outlined, or maybe not as much as it is right now. So, and I'll also maybe erase this here, but for this I actually gonna use the same brush to erase, so it's gonna preserve some of that irregularities instead of doing this really weird fade. So, and I'm kind of going to make sure that this is sort of following the straight line. So that way I can make sure that those lines are not going outside too much, and we're actually getting sort of like an interesting effect right here. So cool. So maybe I want to delete this shadow right here too, or this line here, or maybe I'm actually gonna keep it, or make it irregular, like it's not going fully up. So And again, might delete this line right here and make sure that this is following this kind of look. All right, cool. So gonna get rid of that real quick. And then what I'm going to do is I'm gonna create a new layer and add like those little windows and a little tower windows and stuff like that. The same exact thing we've seen in those reference images. So I want to make sure I'm adding that there. And I'll go back to that shadow layer that we've created and just erase inside. So we get like a little interesting look into it. It's not fully crossing through. It almost feels like we intentionally left a little bit of that space to get those windows in. And that's the beauty of working digitally, because it allows you to actually have those things done that way. Otherwise, it would mean that you need to work with an eraser, and that would actually suck. So, because you might accidentally erase half of your image. So what we're gonna do here is I'm also imagining, because obviously the medieval constructions are done with stone, so I'm kind of trying to put a little bit of that feeling that this is made out of stone. So, and because I don't have this line, I'm trying to kind of keep this line out of the way as much as I can. I'm actually trying to infuse some of the detail that is creating this artificial line. Instead of having a straight line just by itself, I'm actually putting like little bricks that are suggesting where the edge is. And then we can also create like those little seam lines or something like that that kind of suggest different levels or something. Like that. All right, so next thing I want to do is add a little bit of that lines to my rock formation. So I'm gonna just sort of draw lines like that. They're gonna follow the same directions, or because there are rocks, I want to create an illusion that this is a different type of material. And in order to do that, you need to work with different directionality of line. Because if you change directionality of line, when you have a very specific rule, okay, on my buildings, the line's going to be going horizontally, but on my rocks, which are going to be sharp, I want those lines to go very vertically or even diagonally. So that's the rule I'm imposing right here. And maybe it doesn't have to be like all the rocks going that direction. So we'll see. I'm just gonna do a little bit of sketching here. Again, I just want to create a quick illusion of what this cliff looked like. I actually figured out that maybe this is going to be too steep. I want to have a little bit of flatter, sort of like a flatter surface right here, and almost feel like our rock or our tower is actually sitting on not only just the cliff, but also the formation of the cliff is going up and then sheer drop. So that's the basic idea behind this. So what I'm going to do now is just start drawing those lines like that, sort of suggesting where the shadows are, maybe suggesting the sheer drop that we have right here. And again, just kind of doing those little drawings this way allows me to kind of make it feel very, very traditional in a way, because this is probably very similar. You would probably draw your drawings on the paper in a very similar way, and that kind of allows us to fake that traditional look into digital realm. So again, I'm just gonna suggest that this is a cliff right here, and it's just dropping down. And the way I'm trying to work here is I'm not really cross-hatching, I'm just drawing lines. But I'll show you in a moment what can be done when you actually cross-hatch. So I'm changing directions, and I actually figured out, you know what, there's a little bit too much of too many of lines. I want to actually get rid of some of them and suggest that there is maybe different sort of like a different levels of this drop, so it doesn't feel very uniform. I want it to feel very irregular and rock-like, because otherwise we can get in the trap of making it look like it's too busy, and we want to avoid that. So that's what I'm doing here. Cool. So I think in terms of like how the rock looks, it's good enough already. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select those 3 layers and move them somewhere in the middle, because it's a pretty large drawing. And what I'm going to do is create one more layer and then sort of like work in some of the cloud shapes, because I want to have like this very nice cloudy sort of day look into it. So, or maybe like a very fairy tale kind of looking clouds. So the cumulus clouds, which are the good weather clouds. Sort of just to suggest that there's a little bit more going on in this image than just a tower and an empty background. I think this kind of cloud kind of works already. Maybe a little bit of that right here. I'm trying to find a shape that's going to be working pretty well. So sometimes it's a matter of tries. So I'm gonna make a selection and delete, and just gonna try a couple of times until I find the right shapes. And those shapes, I want to make them very different from what you see here. There is a lot of diagonal lines here and straight lines and whatnot. I want the clouds to feel very puffy and very very organic in a way. So, and with the clouds, I'm gonna do the same. I'm actually gonna use maybe, or actually, you know what? For the clouds, we're just gonna leave them as they are right now. So there is no need to make more lines, because it's just gonna distract us from looking at what the essence of this image is. So right now, I'm just gonna select all the layers and then scale this all the way down like this. Go right here, and now create a layer and then draw like a little box around this. So I can make it feel like it's a confined, separate drawing. And because it's digital, I can actually move it around and reframe and make it feel like whatever I like. So I'm gonna press Ctrl T, maybe scale it like this. And then what I can add here is a little bit of that lines that we are missing here. So there we go. So we have our first drawing, and as you see, we can fake shadows and make it feel like it's more 3-dimensional just by the fact that we are using those lines and we're drawing with lines. It's a little bit time consuming, but the way it looks totally different than what we did before with just one big block of shadow, which works fine, but it's creating totally different way this whole image will going to look like. So, and again, you can kind of go further than this. Let's say we want to add a little bit of seagulls flying here, so you can actually do that. So we're just adding a little bit of that nice detail. Obviously, you need to be really careful about scale and how much you're adding, because it's quickly can become very noisy, and we want to avoid that. This is supposed to be just a sketch, and I want this sketch to look somewhat clean. So I maybe suggest that there's a little bit more land right here with just that. Cool. So this is good enough, and this is a first sketch that we're going to use. From here, we're gonna try to discuss with the next sketch what the actual cross-hatching is, or like how this kind of sketch could work when it's actually being cross-hatched instead of just having those lines that going in different directions. All right, so let's talk about the cross-hatching and how we can actually use it for our drawings. And we've done so far this little sketch right here, and we're gonna do a pretty similar job right now, just maybe a different area or something else for now. And what I'm going to start is I have my group here. I've created this group. You can do it by pressing Ctrl G or this little icon right here that looks like a folder. And I have this group open. You can actually open it by clicking this arrow. I've created 2 layers inside of it. What's going to happen is if you have a group selected and you create a layer, it's going to get inside that group. So I've made 2 layers for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my horizon line, obviously, and then do a little bit of that. Work with perspective. And again, I can, all I need to do is just sort of have my lines more or less there. I'm actually want to create quite a few of those right here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a staircase. So I'm doing quite a few lines for that. I want to create like a ruin-like staircase. Right, so it's gonna reach somewhere here. Then we're gonna have a few more lines just for reference. I'm going to now change the opacity of it, so I don't need the full opacity. And I'm gonna work on this layer for now. So what I wanna do is I wanna outline now what this staircase is gonna look like. So basically I'm just gonna draw something like this. And I want this to kind of break down right here. And we're only gonna focus on this little window right here. So it's gonna continue from here. And actually, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do this trick. Okay. And it's gonna continue from, okay, this is going to be a stair right here. And I'm just eyeballing. For now, I'm just sort of sketching out what exactly I want to see. And right at top of the staircase, I probably want to have like another ruin type look right here. So maybe something like that. Okay, cool. And a little bit of this going on here. I'm actually going to draw a couple more lines for ourselves right here. And I'll just suggest that I want to limit this sketch to be only about this area. So I see that I want to add a little bit more lines. Go and remove this little drawing, this little line that I created here. Go back and kind of extend it just a little bit, much like this. And draw a couple of more perspective lines. That's cool. Now here I'm just gonna sketch out, okay, I want to have my the bottom of the column, and what I'm going to assume is this kind of perspective. This is my bottom of the column. This is going to be this roundness here, and then I'm just going to draw the column right here. And then just going to draw the edge of the staircase right here. Cool. And now I can extend it, and I want to extend it a little bit further, make it look like the staircase is only right here. I'm only sketching right now. I'm just kind of trying to figure out what this area is going to look like. Maybe a little bit of that 2 columns somewhere in the background. And then one more bigger column somewhere here in the edge. And this one could actually be a ruin. Alright, so what I'm going to actually do is, extend this real quick to here. So I can see, so this column is not going to be cropped. It's a bad idea to crop the column right here. We don't want to do that. It's going to look horrible in terms of composition, and we'll discuss exactly why it's going to work like that in terms of composition, why you shouldn't crop those things when you have them in the screen, on the screen. Sorry. So cool. So we're kind of outlining what's where, and that should give us, all right, this should look good, right? We can go from here. So what I'm going to do is maybe let's add like a part of a column here that's just fallen down, and another one right here, sort of just to frame it. Very irregular shape. All right, so we have our just dirty sketch, and I'm just gonna make it so it's not fully fleshed out. And what I'm going to show you is how I would work about cross-hatching and drawing this in general. So I would start very similar as we did before, but this time around I would just make those lines much more closer to each other, like this. And then I want to continue with those lines right here. And I'm only doing, you know, just because it's going to be taking quite a long time, I decide that I want to make this brush a little bigger. Maybe like 6 pixels. Because otherwise it's just going to be a little bit too time consuming. All right, so you see, first issue I'm having here is I'm basically reaching that point that I know is going to be, those lines are going way too far. So I want to just erase right here. And the next thing I want to do is, you see I have this outline right here, and I'm assuming the sun is somewhere there, so I want to have like a little bit of shadow. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start drawing a shadow which is in totally different direction, much like this, and then I want to eventually start like cross-hatching here. So this way I'm giving it directionality. I'm telling where this is going, which part is going in which direction, and I can go ahead and almost do it like that, but it's just going too far a little bit, so I don't want to outline anything. All right, cool, and we'll do the same thing right here. So just gonna draw those lines like this. All right, so we have our sketch. Now I want to start outlining it. I want to start sort of showing you where exactly we would get that cross-hatching and how to deal with that. So what I want to do is I want to have this verticality element to it, but I want also to have a little bit of that cross-hatching going on, and I'll show you where exactly I'm going to use. So I'm just going to start drawing like vertical lines to show you where I would imagine the shadow would be. And I'm not going to be super accurate in terms of like how I'm drawing those lines, because I just want to focus on getting the essence of it, you know? So, all right, cool. So from here, I want to have like a little more shadow right here. And this is where I'm going to start crossing those lines together. Now, what I want to avoid is, I don't want to do this. I don't want to draw lines like that and then start doing lines like this. I want to avoid this pattern that creates this very boxy kind of look. Obviously, there are ways to make it look good. In general, what I see most is I see the lines going like that, and then generally the cross-hatching would be more like this. But I also have seen the drawings, obviously, that have, you know, lines like this, and then different frequency of lines that go this direction. I generally don't like this style personally, so that's why I'm going to just go with more verticality right here. I also want to make this area feel a little bit more steep and more vertical, even though the stairs themselves aren't that vertical at all. So and the cross-hatching element I'm starting to introduce only in the area where I'm assuming that there's still shadow, right? But there's more organic matter going on here. So I'll keep vertical lines only for my elements that are more structural and more architectural, and then I'll get more cross-hatching elements or lines that are not necessarily going vertical but more diagonal in the areas where I still want to have shadow, but I want the shadow to be implying that there is more organic grounds. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm imagining there are rock formations here, and I want to just sort of like make those lines cross each other. So that way what I'm creating is I'm creating a illusion of different material, even though I'm just drawing lines. And that's the general essence of why I'm doing this. And then I can use my eraser to pretty much outline my where my shadow is going. And this is the beauty of Photoshop. Obviously you can do the same stuff with pencils. It's gonna work exactly same way. However, the beauty of Photoshop, or the great thing about having Photoshop, is that you can basically undo and you have more room for error. You're not confined with the media, the traditional media, so much as you would be if you would just draw on paper, because digital media allows you to do a lot of undos. It allows you to work in different layers. So by just different layers alone will give you so much flexibility in terms of what you can do. It's like, let's imagine I wanna keep adding those darker lines, but I'm not entirely sure if that's a great idea. Well, here it is. I can do it on a new layer and keep adding those lines like this. So it's becoming more and more opaque, but it's still having this verticality coming from the line direction. And I can now disable or enable the layer and see exactly how it looks. Cool. And you will see exactly where this is going as soon as I start removing those lines. We're going to speed up a video here because this is going to be extremely time consuming. The idea though is to show you how far you can go with this sketching, and also where we'll discuss where and how we can actually use this technique. Obviously, just for a regular sketch, as we did with a castle, you would probably just want to do something as simple as that castle that we just created moments ago. But for this drawing, I want to go even a little further. I want to create something more realistic, or rather more detailed, and play around with the idea of how much can be done with the sketch and how far this can go, and actually then discuss when it's too far. Like when would you generally stop sketching this, and how this applies to the video games. Other people to come up with something totally different and contribute to the final product, which is the video game. Okay, before we jump into the idea how to use composition in sketches, I wanted to show you really quick on one more technique, which is done exactly the same way we've been sketching before, but just much quicker. These sketches you see here take roughly about a couple of minutes. They're not really that elaborated. They're only showing the basic idea, and I'm not really focusing on anything else but the idea itself and the composition. The reason to work this way for me personally is just to have those ideas somewhere on a paper, so I don't forget them. This kind of sketching it can be done during the meetings, or when you're waiting for feedback and you just want to occupy your head with just some more sketching, come up with some more ideas, or maybe you have this wonderful idea for a composition or for a design of what, you know, the castle or whatever architectural point is going to look like, or maybe you have this environment in your head that you just want to sketch out before you forget what it was, and this is perfect for that. Basically doing something really quick, just to represent what exactly is in your head, and that's it. Not even focusing on any details or anything that would give you a better understanding what exactly you're looking at. Just the general feeling. So for instance, in the first sketch we can clearly see it's a castle, but then again you cannot say exactly what architectural style it is. You could only guess this could be a Romanesque, but depending on how far you go with details, it could be completely different beast. You know, you can make it even Rococo or Baroque, or even, you know, go as far as you know, neoclassical kind of construction. You never know until you get further with the details. So same situation with the hill, the sketch with the hill, and there's like a little pagoda, or, you know, a little kind of gate looking thing. Again, this is not really representing any kind of specific architectural style, or you cannot even decipher what is in the background. It could be hills with trees, or maybe you know, clouds, but just the general idea of what this is already there. And because you remember what you've sketched, and as soon as you start sketching and putting things on paper or on canvas, it's almost like you're engraving it inside your head, and you remember them for a little longer than just, you know, that single thought that you had that you might forget unless you really sketch it. When it's already there, when you go back to this, it's going to be much easier for you to focus on, you know, fleshing this out, rather than thinking, what I was thinking during that meeting. What was the essence of the ideas that were brainstormed? And again, the similar idea with the third sketch, where it's a forest. I'm thinking cherry blossom, white flowers, and stuff like that. This could be like a feudal Japan sort of environment. But when you look at the sketch, it could also be just, you know, a dead forest, and only you will know about that. Like, you will exactly know what it is because you sketched that during the meeting, and you can make notes, like write quick notes. This is a dead forest, or this is cherry blossom, or, you know, this was supposed to be a Romanesque style, or something like that. And just a quick note right next to a sketch that represents your basic idea. One interesting thing, or one important thing that I wanted to stress out here is those sketches are probably not good to be represented during the meeting. This is something you could potentially discuss with someone who's well versed in art, whether it's your art director or creative director, and flesh them out a little later, because those sketches are really quick, and they're, unless they have notes and exact specifications, they're not going to be that easy to decipher for a regular person, whether it's you know, a producer that you know, his responsibilities are different than yours, and we've already discussed that, you know, the presentation of your images. So I would say those kind of sketches are basically mostly done for your own sort of almost like your own notebook, where you're just making notes, but you make them visual instead of making them in words, because visual notes are usually better than just the regular notes. Once you draw something, you have a composition, you have a general feel of what this is and how far this can go and all that, and it's usually going to be much better in the long run when you want to go back to it and flesh it out. Another important point in creating this kind of sketches is it allows you to experiment with composition. And we've discussed a couple of rules in composition. In most cases, when you work for video games, composition rules are most likely going to be used during that period of time where you're actually sketching. When you get into actual production, where you need to solve problems, when you need to design something for 3D modelers or work with the designers on a specific location that has gameplay constraints and maybe kind of blocking objects, and when you work with screenshots, or when you work with block meshes, anything like that, composition is not going to matter anymore, because your sense of design and your sense of construction and problem solving will be the key for concept art at that point. One of the biggest difference between illustration and concept art is the concept art is supposed to solve problems, whereas illustration is supposed to just look beautiful and be inspiring. So when you do this kind of sketches, it's a great canvas for exploration and a great canvas to come up with interesting compositions, because compositions themselves can be really useful for cinematics, for establishing shots, which we'll discuss later as well. Anything like that where let's say you have a situation where the player enters a new level, and the first thing that you see is exactly that piece that you've drawn. So that could be one of the ways of using compositions. And when you just sketch and you're not spending more than 2 or 3 minutes, you can test yourself and see, okay, this is a good composition for what I need to have here. That might not have worked well for something else. And when you give yourself a try and do those really quick sketches, you're not really wasting time and investing a lot of time into something that might not really work that well. So doing thumbnail sketches like this, whether it's done on a computer or during the meeting where you're using your pen and paper, or maybe you have a tablet that you can use during the meeting or anything like that. Or even just doing them on the phone. There are phone apps that allow you to draw, and you can come up with like really dirty, quick sketches that are just going to be a visual representation of what you had in your mind during that time. Those will allow you to test compositions and test those composition rules. And one of the most used rule that we've discussed, obviously, is going to be rule of thirds, because that's the rule that almost granted will make your general composition really interesting. Unless you specifically want to do something that is symmetrical, rule of thirds is going to be the one that is most applied. And you can test it here. Well, you can just create really quick, dirty sketches, draw a couple of lines, do little constructions in perspective, and check what works and what doesn't. What kind of placement makes sense? What kind of placement doesn't make sense? And even by testing compositions, you can discuss that with, say, a level designer who might be designing a layout, and you have an entry point for your player and something just looking off, and your sketches and your quick doodles can just show that designer, okay, look, if you move that building a little to the left, maybe, or maybe a little to the right, this is going to look much more visually interesting, and that might be a possibility for a designer to do. Maybe that specific building is not really a gameplay piece and can be moved around. So those quick doodles, generally for your own use during the meeting, almost like your own notepad, that you can present unofficially and work with others unofficially, or maybe work with art director, and almost as a blueprint or a starting point for something that could be fleshed out into more elaborated sketches. And the second sketch that we're going to look at right here after this panel, this is this is exactly the same technique that we've used so far when we looked at the sketches in the previous chapter, when we were discussing how to actually create sketches, how to use cross-hatching or line directionality, and how to use your sketch brush and the sketch canvas that is provided in this lesson to create something that looks visually interesting. So one aspect is obviously the visual interest and defining the speed and the amount of details that you're putting into your work. The second aspect is how you're gonna work with within the rules of composition to actually create something that is visually interesting. So the reason why composition is really important at this stage is again, when you create those visual cues, when you work with thumbnails, or when you work with more elaborated sketches that are taking you anywhere between, say, 10 to 20 minutes, where you're just putting a lot of effort into it, or even if you're working on a sketch that is, an hour long, that could be another situation. Your composition is going to be a key at that point, because you can create something that looks visually interesting, or you can put a lot of cool lines and construct a lot of cool things that are working well in perspective. But if you choose a wrong composition, you can ruin the impression and ruin the presentation of your own sketch. Again, something important to remember at this stage, composition itself is going to be very useful. There's going to be situations where you might just want to sketch out something or do quick thumbnails for something that doesn't really need a composition. Let's say there's a problem with the building construction, and you need to come up with a few ideas how to do, say, building attachments. Maybe there's a bridge that's coming out of the building itself, or maybe there's a bridge connecting two buildings, or maybe there's a tower that is attached to the building, or some kind of awnings, or anything you can imagine, depending on the genre of the game and anything like that. That is going to be a different situation. You're not going to be focusing on composition, but you'll be just sketching ideas. And this is perfect technique for that. You can just do really quick sketches using rules of composition. Is not going to be as dramatic as using perspective rules in that case. So drawing something really quick in perspective, and then coming up with sketch ideas, like how to present this in the best way, how to add those elements that look really cool. But coming back to this sketch, this is more of an exercise to create an idea, almost like an establishing shot, or maybe a frame from a cinematic, for instance, right? This could be very good example of that. And the composition rule I used here specifically is a symmetrical composition. There is a symmetry coming from the fact that we have our perspective, the vanishing point, meeting right in the middle of the image. So we have, it would be almost a one-point perspective at this point, if not the distortion that we're creating with the wide-angle camera. And that distortion itself is adding a second point, or a second vanishing point, which is way below the image. So we can obviously see it. I just sketched out the lines, and I imagine that those lines meet somewhere down below. And also you could almost consider this to be a cross, almost like a cross composition as well, because as you can see, the line of the buildings, the placement of the buildings themselves is sitting almost in the middle of the image, right across it. Horizontally, it's almost, or actually vertically, it's almost right in the center. Especially when I place those lines that are creating shadow and constructing walls of those buildings. Because you can clearly see this is kind of this very Neolithic style of construction, where you see the huts built from, or you could imagine those are huts built from wood. Wooden huts with like really steep roof. But basically the spacing between the huts and the line of the walls and how it is all constructed, you can clearly see that the line is almost going right across the center of the image. The horizontal line is almost right across the center of the image. It's slightly shifted up because I primarily focused on the symmetrical composition, the vertical symmetry. So left and right is basically as close as possible. Obviously, trees are not exactly the same, but there is some symmetry between the trees, or some of them, and the amount of buildings, or the volume of how many buildings are on the left versus how many buildings are on the right, is very similar. The volume of values, or how many lines I'm putting on the left side versus right side, how dark is the top versus the bottom, all of it is creating this result that is making it look like a cross composition. All right, so it's time for takeaways for this lesson. And